Hi there, Steve here to talk about languages. And of course, if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe to my channel. Today, I want to talk a little bit more about our mini story project. You'll remember last time I talked about these mini stories that we're creating, not we, I've actually commissioned a writer to write them. Very interesting little vignettes of everyday life that incorporate the basic patterns and structures of English. And I said, let's get some interest in translating these into other languages, whether it be languages we have at LingQ or other languages, Farsi, Indonesian, whatever it might be. And we've had a good response from people offering to translate these stories into a variety of languages. And so we're coordinating this, and we're going to be contacting every one of you to try and divide the work up so that one person doesn't have to do all of the stories. I'm working on the Greek part of it because I'm learning Greek, and Pavlos in Greece is recording these stories on his iPhone, and I must say the audio quality is very good. So we want to go forward. But today I'm thinking that, okay, it's one thing to translate these stories into other languages, and by and large it works because it's been my conviction for the longest time that, because I've learned, I'm now on my 17th language, that the basic concepts and structures and things that we want to say in a language are by and large the same in all languages. The issues are the same. Obviously, we're dealing with, people and things like nouns. We're dealing with descriptions like adverbs and adjectives of different kinds and where they go in the sentence. We're dealing with basically past, present, future. There's variations on these tenses, but essentially something that happened in the past, that's happening now, or that will happen in the future. We deal with maybe, probability, might, or have to, should, ought to, or why, because, or in order to, or therefore. We deal with, in, by, on, with, in other words, prepositions, or in some languages, the nouns or adjectives change depending on whether it's by, in, at, from. But the fundamental concepts and the things we want to say, in my opinion, from my point of view, on the other hand, all of these things, we end up having to say them in all these different languages. So, the key is to get interesting stories. Then they can be translated and they still work for learning other languages. The advantage then there is that we have translations. The structure of the stories also, I think, is key to making it a good learning experience. But what I want to get to today is, what I want to get some feedback on is, we will continue with our English stories and use them as the core from which we translate into other languages. But obviously, these are written and they will have an English language cultural bias. Now, when we translate them, we try to localize them. We change the names from, George to George, or Pedro, but, and other minor changes. However, it would really be fun to have stories written originally in other languages by people who can create interesting little vignettes, okay? So typically the format is 10 or 12 not too long sentences describing someone doing something out of everyday life, and then the same story from another point of view, which might be tense, which might be person, rather than he or she, it's I. And then followed by questions. And one of the things, as I said, that Piotr did so well in his questions is that the answer is contained in the question, so you don't have to try to remember what was in the story. What this does is it creates a tremendous amount of repetition, and it gives you a chance, if you want to try and answer, to try and say something in response to what you're listening to. However, everything is in the target language, unlike some systems, like Pimsleur, where you're being prompted in your language, which in my view is not as good. Other people may disagree. It's not as good as having everything in the language you are learning. So what I'm asking today is, are there people who are interested in writing some original stories of everyday life, little vignettes, on the same basic format, but in Farsi or Vietnamese or Quechua or whatever it might be, so that we grow this project. So it's not just translating from English into these other languages, which is still key, and I want to do that, and I want to get through that part of the project. But on an ongoing basis, we can make this a project where people are creating stories, translating stories, so that if we get a story in, you know, Slovakian, that someone can translate that into English. And always we want the translations done by native speakers. So native speakers write the stories, and native speakers translate these into their own language. And we just get this tremendous mushrooming of these stories. The other advantage of having stories written in other languages rather than English is that while the fundamental concepts in any language, the, you know, whatever it might be, past, present, future, you know, comparative, super, like big, bigger, biggest, or all of these things are similar in all languages. Languages deal with them somewhat differently. So the translation to a large extent works. However, there are specific issues to specific languages. You know, particles in Japanese, watashi wa, anata e, whatever. You know, and some languages, you know, cases in Slavic languages, whatever it might be, there are verbs of motion, which are a bigger issue in Slavic languages. So to some extent, someone writing a story in another language other than English may develop stories that focus on these issues a little more, and so that when we translate them, they're still good for learning, say, English if we translate them back into English, but they're really powerful for learning those languages where those specific issues are what cause problems. Now, it is not difficult to Google and find out what are the major problems you know, learners of a particular language have. I was able to Google what are the major issues for learners of English, so that we can identify what these, so if I'm a native speaker of Russian and I'm going to create some stories in Russian, then it's not difficult to find out that most foreigners have trouble with verbs with motion, they have trouble with you know, the aspect of verbs and so forth, so that if I'm a Russian speaker, native speaker, then I would create some stories, hopefully interesting stories, that would focus on those issues. So there you have it. It's again on the subject of these mini stories, but I would be interested in your reaction to actually creating original stories in other languages, which other people would then translate back into their native language as part of this, call it mini story, language promotion, language learning project that we're developing here. So I look forward to your feedback, and thank you for listening.